From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I ran out. I went to the door that was closed. I didn't know that was closed. I went there and I found the door closed. I just stood there till they opened it. 40 people going down the steps. We all tumbled one right after another. And I saw people throwing themselves from the window. And as soon as we went down, we couldn't get out because the bodies were coming down. It was terrible.
It was 100 years ago today, March 25th, 1911. 146 workers, mainly immigrant women, died in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire here in New York City, many of them leaping to their deaths when they tried to escape and found the emergency exits locked. It was a fire that would spark the labor rights movement of today. And where are we today?
It was an 11-story building. It was lunchtime. There were workers in the cafeteria on the 11th floor, and they started to smell smoke. They didn't panic. They did just what the workers did at the Triangle. They started to go towards the exit. The workers tried to get out the exit, and the flames were so great and the smoke was so dense, they had to retreat. They ran through the cafeteria to the other side of the building, the west side, and they tried to go out the fire exits, and the exit doors were locked.
Just one of many fires, this one in Bangladesh, which took place last December, where 26 workers died making clothes for U.S. companies. Today, we spend the hour looking at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire and its significance. We'll be joined by historians, immigrant and labor rights activists. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Japanese officials are conceding the core of a damaged reactor at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant may have cracked. Nuclear safety officials say a probe is underway to determine the source of the leak that has emitted dangerous levels of radiation and raised fears of contaminated food and water supplies. 2 workers at the plant were hospitalized on Thursday after stepping in contaminated water. The water had 10,000 times the amount of radiation normally found in water from a functioning reactor. The official death toll from the Japanese earthquake and tsunami has passed 10,000, with more than 17,000 missing. The ongoing crisis in Japan comes as a new federal report is calling into question the self-regulatory practices of nuclear plants in the United States. According to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's Inspector General, over a quarter of U.S. nuclear plants have failed to properly report equipment defects that could threaten the safety of their reactors. At least 28% of the nation's 104 nuclear plants appeared unaware of rules requiring disclosure of any safety flaws, even if no incidents occur. Experts say the lack of disclosures could make it more difficult for nuclear operators to uncover flaws in the equipment they have in common with other plants. NATO countries have agreed to join the military intervention in Libya. On Thursday, NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen said the military alliance's mandate will be kept to enforcing the no-fly zone over Libyan airspace to protect civilians.
NATO allies have now decided to enforce the no-fly zone over Libya. We are taking action as part of the broad international effort to protect civilians against the attacks by the Gaddafi regime. We will cooperate closely with our partners in the region, and we welcome their contributions.
Rasmussen's statement appeared to contradict earlier comments by Turkey's foreign minister, who said NATO would be taking control of all military operations in Libya from the U.S.-led international coalition. Around 336,000 people have fled Libya since clashes erupted between rebels and Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi's forces. At the United Nations, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said the Gaddafi regime remains in violation of international calls for a ceasefire.
Libyan authorities have repeatedly claimed that they have instituted a ceasefire, including in a call to me by the Prime Minister of Libya on 19 March. We see no evidence that is the case. To the contrary, fierce battles have continued in or around the cities of Ajdabiya, Misrata, and Jitan, among others. In short, there is no evidence the Libyan authorities have taken steps to carry out their obligations under resolutions 1970 or 1973.
The Gaddafi regime continues to attack rebel-held towns in the opposition stronghold of Benghazi. A Libyan rebel leader urged the international community to provide weapons to anti-Gaddafi forces.
In fact, we need support. We need support in this subject especially. And our friends, they are trying now to support us. And I hope that soon we will succeed, and we will have all that weapons that can help us to liberate the whole Libya, inshallah.
The Gaddafi regime continues to claim the U.S.-led bombing campaign has killed civilians. A Libyan government spokesperson said around 100 civilians have died in Western airstrikes and accused the U.S.-led coalition of seeking to bomb non-military targets, including phone towers and broadcasting stations.
These are civilian targets, broadcasting, whether it's radio or TV, communications, whether it's phones or other uses, are all civilian, and they are for the good of the Libyan nation. But we are getting close to 100, that's for sure. Yes, I've asked the Minister for Health to be with you tomorrow. I'm going to Bush. He is an extremely busy man. I can understand why.
Protesters in Syria are gearing up for another day of massive demonstrations, despite a pledge from the Syrian government to enact reforms. On Thursday, a spokesperson for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said the government would review a long-standing emergency law and consider allowing political parties. The pledge came as over 20,000 people rallied in the city of Daraa, where state forces killed at least 25 people earlier this week. Tens of thousands of people have flooded the streets of the Yemeni capital of Sana'a today in the growing uprising against the U.S.-backed President Ali Abdullah Saleh. Opposition activists have rejected Saleh's offer to step down by the end of the year and to provide amnesty to defecting soldiers.
We asked the president to leave and give up his authority in order to avoid bloodshed, because the people will continue to revolt until this regime falls.
Today's protests comes 1 week after 52 demonstrators were killed by the Saleh forces. Pro-democracy activists in Jordan have established a tent camp in the capital of Amman, modeled after Egypt's Tahrir Square. Over 1,000 people set up the encampment Thursday night, calling themselves the March 24th movement after the date their action began. The tent camp could re-spark a wave of protests that broke out inside Jordan earlier this year. The U.S.-led NATO force in Afghanistan has issued another apology for the killing of Afghan civilians. NATO says 2 civilians were accidentally killed in an airstrike Wednesday in the province of Khost. 2 children were killed in another NATO attack last week, and 9 boys were killed in an attack earlier this month. Wisconsin's anti-union bill is headed to the state Supreme Court after a lower appeals court declined to weigh in. The state has appealed last week's decision by a Wisconsin judge to issue a temporary restraining order blocking the measure's implementation. The judge ruled Republican lawmakers were likely in violation of open meeting laws when they pushed through the legislation earlier this month. In related news, an Indiana prosecutor has resigned after acknowledging he advised Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker to stage a physical attack on himself and blame it on protesters. In an email to Walker, the prosecutor, Carlos Lamb, wrote, quote, "If you could employ an associate who pretends to be sympathetic to the union's cause to physically attack you or even use a firearm against you, you could discredit the public unions." Lamb has been active in the Republican Party in Indiana. He initially denied authoring the email Thursday before admitting to it and submitting his resignation. A major labor protest was seen in New York this week against austerity measures pushed by Democratic Governor Andrew Cuomo. On Wednesday, 33 people were arrested after blocking the entrance to Cuomo's office in the state capital of Albany. The protesters organized the rally to criticize Cuomo's plan for billions in budget cuts while refusing to extend a tax on millionaire New Yorkers. Republican lawmakers in Ohio and Texas have advanced controversial voter ID measures that critics say will discriminate against people of color. The Ohio measure would restrict acceptable documents for in-person voting to 5 types of ID. Ohio residents would no longer be allowed to present documents including bills, bank statements, or even government documents. Students would no longer be allowed to use college IDs. The Texas measure would also force residents to present valid photo ID such as a driver's license, passport, military ID, or state ID in order to vote. Thousands of people have rallied at the Georgia state capitol in Atlanta against an immigration bill similar to the Arizona measure passed last year. The legislation would mandate law enforcement officers to check the immigration status of suspects if officers believe they have probable cause. And the State Department has reversed a decision to deny a travel visa to Afghan women's and democracy activist Malalai Joya. In 2005, Malalai Joya became the youngest person ever elected to the Afghan parliament. She was suspended in 2007 for her denunciation of warlords and their cronies in government. Joya had planned a 3-week U.S. tour to promote a new edition of her memoir when she was barred earlier this month. The decision was reversed after the State Department came under heavy protest. Malalai Joya is scheduled to speak with MIT professor Noam Chomsky tonight in Boston. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
And welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Today marks the centennial anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. It was the deadliest workplace accident in New York City's history and a seminal moment for American labor. On March 25, 1911, nearly 150 garment workers, mostly young immigrant women, died after a fire broke out at the Triangle factory near Washington Square Park. Only a year before the lethal fire, the garment workers of the city had protested for shorter hours, better pay, safer work conditions, and the right to unionize. Tired of toiling for 13 hours a day for as little as 13 cents an hour, the workers called for a strike, emerging as leaders in what became the largest women's labor walkout in American history. The factory owners hired thugs to suppress their action, but in the 11th week of the strike, the owners finally agreed to higher wages and shorter hours. They drew the line, however, at a union. Denied any collective bargaining rights, the Triangle workers were powerless to change the abysmal conditions in their factory. Inadequate ventilation, lack of safety precautions and fire drills, and locked doors.
When a lit cigarette or match ignited a fire on the 8th floor of the building, flames spread quickly and trapped the women in a deadly inferno. Today, we spend the hour looking back at the fire and its significance 100 years later. We're going to begin with an excerpt of a radio piece I produced 25 years ago. In 1986, along with Kathy Dobie. It was then the 75th anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire.
I
worked right near where the fire was. There was cutters there. They were cutting the material. And as soon as they were just going out, it was time to go home. It was 4 o'clock on Saturday.
Pauline Pepe is a 94-year-old survivor of the Triangle fire.
I saw the fire in the tables where they were all filled with lingerie material, you know, and that come up in a flame. When I saw that, I ran out. I went to the door that was closed. I didn't know that was closed. I went there and I found the door closed. I just stood there till they opened it. 40 people going down the steps. We all tumbled one right after another. And I saw people throwing themselves from the window. And as soon as we went down, we couldn't get out because the bodies were coming down. It was terrible.
The women that died that late afternoon were young Jewish and Italian immigrants. When the fire broke out, they tried to escape down the stairs, but found the doors had been locked. The owners believed that given the chance, workers would sneak out with stolen material, and union organizers would sneak in.
Some of the women climbed onto the single fire escape. It collapsed. As onlookers watched, women fell 9 stories to the sidewalk below. Inside the factory, the fire spread quickly, and with no exit left to them, the women climbed through the windows and leapt to their death. While some union members walked in the vigil, others took buses to a Brooklyn cemetery where 7 unidentified Triangle victims lie buried.